Yeah. So by excuse me, by aircraft management, what we're talking about is really the whole big picture. It's a holistic approach to the entire system that I mean, in order to operate an aircraft, obviously it needs to be managed. The airworthiness needs to be managed. The maintenance needs to be managed. The flight operations need to be managed. But typically, for instance, what I've seen in as a regulator is this is all managed in completely separate silos. Each, even within the regulatory authorities, quite often everything is broken into airworthiness, flight operations, whatever. But I mean, it's critically important that everybody understand that there's an overlap in each one of these areas, and communication, coordination between each of these areas is vitally important to ensure a good, efficient, and safe operation.
Yeah.
Flight operations, um, ultimately, they're responsible for all kinds of aspects that could be influenced by the airworthiness of the aircraft. I mean, simply flying the aircraft requires that you have a serviceable aircraft. Well, how do flight ops know that the aircraft is serviceable? You'd be very surprised, but I've seen very few flight operations, very few pilots that can look at a maintenance release and
Hmm.
say that it's a valid maintenance release
Yeah.
because nobody ever teaches them. I've talked to many flight schools and they don't actually teach you what a
Hmm.
valid maintenance release is. And you know, there again, what aircraft register is the aircraft on? Because
Hmm.
every register has different release requirements,
Yeah.
even the wording of the maintenance release. And so if again, I've seen an aircraft go into FAA repair stations and get an FAA release that doesn't meet the Cayman requirements, the Bermuda requirements, the San Marino requirements, and technically that release isn't valid,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, there are ways to fix these. There are remedies for these situations, but it's best to try to avoid them to start with.
Yeah. Yeah, and in regards to these duties and responsibilities that can overlap, I think another good example that refers to flight operations is flight manuals updates. Because during, for example, transition projects, and I'm the one that is doing, the worthiness work. At the end, I am used to update the FM so that when the flight crew comes, it's updated and it's there, it's clean, it's perfect. Also, because maybe during the maintenance, maybe some STC have been applied, has been performed that have AFM supplements, so those have to go in there too. But in other circumstances, I wondered, where I manage an aircraft. I was the airworthiness department, and there is a pilot that is flying the aircraft and is responsible for the flight operations aspects. I wonder, is it my duty and responsibilities to tell the flight op, the pilot, well, there are some AFM amendments, you should put them in there because what is it? Is it a flight operations
Yeah, yeah. So
document or is it a worthiness
this
document?
is an age-old discussion, and I mean, we've had this discussion many times.
Mhm.
The flight operations, like if you're in a more of a structured environment, like a commercial airline, typically that's all going to be spelled out in the approved policies and
Mhm.
procedures that the authority blesses. Um, However, you know, it's in my mind, it's actually rather straightforward where the responsibility lies because actually just last night I was looking at the ICAO annexes, and right in the ICAO annexes it states that the flight flight manual constitutes a portion of the C of A.
Mhm.
So the C of A is not valid if it doesn't have a current and valid flight manual on board the aircraft.
Mhm.
So if an organization is charged with ensuring the airworthiness of the aircraft, to me that says that whoever says that this aircraft is airworthy ensures that the flight manual is in place. Now,
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that the airworthiness organization has to be the ones physically putting the amendment pages into the document. If there's a process in place and they can demonstrate that process, that's perfectly acceptable. But ultimately, the responsibility lies with whoever's responsible for the C of A.
Okay, so aircraft management in accordance with the regulation. So no regulation addresses aircraft management as a whole, but they do provide specifics on flight operations, airworthiness, and maintenance. So this is what I've been saying from the beginning. So in the regulation, you can't find a definition for aircraft management because it is very related to flight operations, airworthiness, and maintenance. So you don't have a definition that actually addresses the interconnection between all the three. However, I wanted to put this in piece from EASA because I found it very interesting. Where we have in the EASA guidance material appendix 1 to part M, continuing airworthiness management contract, we find an operator should establish adequate coordination between flight operations and the CAO-CAMO to ensure that both will receive all the necessary information on the condition of the aircraft to enable them perform their tasks. This, I really liked it. I was looking in the EASA regulation and I found that, and I really like it because I like it, the established adequate coordination between flight operations and the CAMO for both to receive all the necessary information on the condition of the aircraft to enable them to perform their tasks. And this is exactly what aircraft management is. And in addition, I would add adequate coordination between flight ops, CAMO, and maintenance, so that both they have all the information they need to do to fulfill their duties and responsibilities. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we move away from
Yes.
this, though, we're talking about adequate coordination between flight operations. So this would insinuate that the flight ops is responsible for communicating with the other parties. I would argue there's an expectation, definitely, from the authorities that all parties, there's coordination between all parties. For instance, with transition aircraft, this is a very, very odd situation because we're not talking about having an air operator in place that is typically the one that operates the aircraft all the time on a daily basis. We're now talking about a ferry flight operation. Well, and we're talking about, with transition aircraft, typically a lessor will engage 3 or 4 different parties. They'll have their own on-site representatives. They'll have flight ops if they're going to fly the aircraft at all. They'll have a camo and they'll have a maintenance provider, because for the maintenance, typically there'll be outstanding maintenance to be due, or there may be livery changes, or the downstream client that will be accepting the aircraft will have their maybe change of seating configuration or whatever the case might be, right? So now you've got 4 entities involved, and who amongst the 4 is responsible to make sure that all efforts are being coordinated? Well, it's certainly not the ferry operator. They're only interested when they're told, okay, the airplane's ready to go. You go pick it up and take it away. But ideally, they should be involved before that point. They should understand what's going on with the aircraft, where it's coming from, where it's going to, what's been done to it in between. Ferry operators, they may not be conversant with the authority under which they're flying the aircraft. It might be a different state register altogether. In that case, probably the camo is the most conversant with all of the requirements, because they will be approved under whatever authority the aircraft, the state is registered. So, unfortunately, the onus tends to get placed on the camo. And rightfully so. I would have an expectation that the camo does not release the aircraft for flight to the flight operator, obviously, until the aircraft has been released from maintenance. So they need to understand what that means. But also, they shouldn't just be releasing it to anybody. They should verify that this flight operator has the state approval to fly that aircraft. They're entitled to do that. And then, typically with ferry flights, there may be inoperable equipment and such. That needs to be readily conveyed to the flight operations, because they need to know what it is they're taking, right? And likewise, if flight ops, if they say, okay, well, we're going to pick the airplane up from Dublin and we're going to take it to Malaysia. Well, okay, wait a minute. So what happens if it goes mechanical on the way? What arrangements are in place?
Yeah.
Who's going to take care of all of that? These are all things that all parties have to be involved
Mhm.
including the owner, most likely. They'll be paying the bills.
So the last 2 points, and here we close the webinar and we see if you guys have some questions. Quality and authorities must be involved, and internal review of projects and outcomes are invaluable. I think that these two things go together. So, like you said, quality should be involved, in particular where projects are complex, like a transition aircraft project, and there should be, in my opinion, a kind of I find when you end a project, a moment, a meeting where everybody sits down and we talk about all the things that went right and all the things that went wrong, not only under a technical point of view, but also under a personal point of view. If you had some friction with another colleague, it would be nice to understand why.
Mhm.
What are your comments on this?
Yeah, I think that's invaluable because that's actually lends itself back to SMS as well, as far as continuous improvement. And that's how you continually improve. You
Hmm.
look at where we came from, how it went, and what you want to avoid from doing again, and what you would like to repeat. That's potentially the recipe for success. From quality and authorities must be involved. I think there's an industry-wide misunderstanding that quality is there to slap your hand and give you a ticket.
Hmm.
Quality can be your best friend, I think, and if you want to make sure that the organization is doing what it's supposed to be doing and is staying within the lines, yeah, you need to have quality involved every step of the way. Unfortunately, quality does have the responsibility to identify non-compliances, and they don't have the authority to fix them. But it's if everybody's working together, it's good. And as far as authorities go, the last thing any authority wants is to have to chase after somebody for some nasty non-compliance where it could have been avoided in the first place.
Hmm.
And I've met too many people in any authority where if you approach them openly and honestly and just say what the situation is and either ask for advice or say, hey, you know what, we found this, it's not right. First thing we're going to say is, okay, well, if it wasn't right, what did you do about it, or what are you going to do about it? And if it's reasonable, most people will just let it be.